Welcome to Viewpoint, Europe's first human rights talk show. Today we're going to be talking about the Roma. They've been called the forgotten people of Europe, and a lot of their history has been about poverty, social exclusion and squalor. It's the same sort of story today, in fact. But before we go on to look at that, let's just have first a look inside the skin of a Roma woman.
It was October 1992. Pogroms had already started in the whole of Romania. But when I heard voices and beatings in the door, I thought that me and my family were going to get killed. I was only 14. My name is Isabella. I am Romanian and I am Romani woman.
Isabella, that's you on the film.
Yes.
And that's a pretty terrifying story. Can you tell us a little bit more?
It is. It was actually terrifying. It was terrible. But I wish I could put it a bit in a context, because after the 90s, with the fall of the communism, there was a rise in mobs throughout Romania, and Romanians would just feel at ease to take whatever they thought it was justice in their hands. And at that time, I could hear a lot about violences in Romania, and I didn't know that I could be one of the victims. So at night, they came at our house as well, and they started to beat in the door and to shout, "Gypsies, get out." And I didn't know why, because we actually didn't do anything wrong. And that was a terrifying experience for somebody that was only 14 years old.
I think the most frightening thing about it is that it's not just Romania. This has happened in every country and throughout history. And the history of the Roma is replete with these sort of stories, isn't it?
It is, and actually there are so many non-Roma people who don't know that Roma was also victims of the Holocaust, that there were 500,000 Roma that died in the Holocaust, and that's something that needs to be taught to children in schools all over Europe.
And of course, hopefully, what we'll be able to do today is open that history out to some people. Now, tell me though, when I've been dealing with the Roma, this word Roma is an interesting one for us, because we always said gypsies. Gypsies were the people who travel, the people with the lovely caravans, and now it's suddenly become Roma. Why? I mean, do you have problems with the word gypsy?
Definitely. And I wanted to say something here, because when you are a child, a Roma child, you only first that you're a gypsy from other people. And I learned so many things about me that I didn't know. And this is one of the things. I learned that I was gypsy, and it's something we don't associate with within our community. It's something we learn from outside. But that has also other roots, because in the 19th century in Romania, Roma used to be victims, we used to be slaves. And this is something we don't want to be related to, because it was a social denomination. It was not actually an ethnic denomination for Roma people. And this is a word that came from outside. It was not something that we chose for ourselves. And therefore, we believe it's very pejorative, and it's something we don't want to be associated with, especially because if you hear gypsy word, it's not really put in a positive context. It's always with some negative effects to it, which obviously we don't want to.
Very understandable. And thanks for setting the scene for us. Let's get our other guests up on the platform now. Great to have you here today. So, Gwen Albert, you're working alongside Roma and other people as part of your work. Can you tell me, do you think this is some sort of new undeclared apartheid?
I think apartheid, unfortunately, is the word. This is probably Europe's biggest untold story and most unrecognized social situation. As Isabella was just describing, the levels of violence that the Roma face across Europe at the hands of their fellow citizens are medieval in nature, and this hasn't ended. It's continuing. It is not something that gets the attention it deserves, and it's unfortunately something that local level politicians play with. There are many different mechanisms by which mayors or town councilors can make sure that the Roma don't live in their town or city, make sure that the Roma don't go to schools with the rest of everyone else. And this is something that must be addressed because their human rights are being violated every single day all across Europe.
And also it shows that people are playing politics with that very important group of people.
Absolutely, and it's a dangerous populism which the Roma become the targets of along with other minorities, but the Roma have been the minority of choice, the scapegoat of choice for centuries in Europe, and it's time to bring it to an end.
Let me turn now to Donatella. Donatella, that must ring some bells with you. You're working for an Italian charity with the Roma people. Yes. What sort of stories are you hearing for them?
Well, all the stories that I am every day hearing from them are stories of discrimination, of poverty. The majority of the Roma that I meet every day are actually escaping from Romania because from situation of poverty and of violence, and they come to Italy looking for a better life and hoping to have chances of better inclusion, but instead what they find, unfortunately in my country, are situation of poverty and exclusion as well.
Can I turn to Michael now? Michael, you are from the Council of Europe and you're actually in charge of the Roma and Travellers Division. Now, the Council of Europe has as its main mission to look after human rights. Big part of that is stopping racism. How do you actually see the situation with the Roma?
Well, we see the situation, in fact, going in the wrong direction at the moment in a number of member states, where you had in the past let's say, passive discrimination, which is, as was mentioned by a previous guest, social exclusion, segregation as well. But you have also now this movement of having more and more political statements, political discourse, hate speech, and also this series of murders and violent attacks against Roma in a number of member states, which is something new.
Is it generally on the rise throughout Europe then, or is it just that the statistics are getting better?
No, it's on the rise in a number of countries. It's definitely on the rise in Central and Eastern Europe, but also in some Western countries as well, which are not so safe countries for Roma as they pretend to be.
And do you have any idea, compared perhaps to other forms of racism, are the Roma more likely to face attack perhaps than other groups of the population?
They are, of course, fragile because they are living in ghetto situations and far from everything, and also because many of them lack education, many of them are illiterate, so they don't have this capacity of defending themselves, for example, in front of courts. That's why the Council of Europe is also trying to organize training for lawyers, for example, to help Roma people to defend their rights in front of national courts and eventually at the European Court of Human Rights.
And I believe also you have a campaign called DOSTA, which is aimed at changing attitudes there.
Yes, definitely. And the aim of the campaign results from a conclusion we had after working for a decade on these issues, where we first addressed governments, where we could see some improvements in terms of policies. Problem remains at the local level, where such policies are not implemented, also because of the stereotypes and prejudices of the majority population. So the campaign, DOSTA, which means enough in Romani, is aimed, in fact, to address these stereotypes and prejudices.
Isabella, you wanted to come in there.
Right.
Can you tell me?
I wanted to add something because your question was about a particular form of racism, which I think it's pretty fair to say that Roma in Europe face a particular form of racism that we call it Antigypsyism, that it's particular to them. Because nowhere else in Europe you would have cases of forced sterilization against a certain category of women. Nowhere else you would have such a huge number of forced and illegal evictions against Roma. Nowhere else you would have court judgments that are actually being ignored by the governments in the way they're ignored when it comes to Roma. So somehow racism against Roma it's justified and it goes unpunished. And this is something that I think it's different from other categories, minority categories.
I'd like to come back on that because it's been very interesting for me when I've been out in Europe working to hear these sort of stories against the Roma. Because to me, a Roma person might look like yourself, a Romanian person. You don't particularly look any different to the majority population. So how come that people target you as a Roma?
Right. Well, they don't target me, as you say, because I don't really look Roma. They target the ones that are visibly Roma. And what are visibly Roma for them is the people that are begging on the street, or the people that are living in camps like in Italy and like in other countries, where they know that there is a special group that we call gypsies, yeah, because it's how they are called. And therefore, they are more visible, and they are a target of violence, of racism, because, as Gwen has said, they become scapegoats for any wrongdoing in the country by a government.
Mm-hmm. And Gwen, I know that you've studied this quite a bit. Do you feel that this is a new form of extremism that's happening in Europe now?
I think this is a revival of the extremism that operates in the human psychology. I don't think this is, I think that it's important that we call what is happening anti-Gypsyism and give it a name, because it hasn't been specifically named. But I think that the motivation to perpetrate violence against people who are other than us is a very ancient human impulse that we have been trying to civilize away from ourselves for centuries, and we're not doing a very good job of it in Europe when it comes to the Roma. The Roma are the punching bag, and Isabella's exactly right. There's incredible impunity, incredible impunity. You hear of large-scale violence committed, and if you follow up who is actually prosecuted or put in jail for perpetrating this violence, it's a handful of people. It's very, very difficult to see through prosecutions of people who commit violence against the Roma. And it has to do with the priorities of the justice system. It has to do with the political situation, the way in which people sense that the public in general doesn't object to the perpetrators of violence against Roma getting off or getting reduced sentences. If you were to reverse the situations, a Roma person committing the same crime would be in jail much faster. And this is very disturbing. This is not equality before the law.
So it's really about an ingrained prejudice in the authorities themselves?
Yes, unfortunately, yes.
Well, let's have a little look now at a film which will show us a little bit more about how the Roma live. So some pretty shocking scenes there, but I was surprised to see that you've got the Eastern Europeans along with the Western Europeans. Strasbourg, Rome, other places. This seems to be a phenomenon everywhere. Donatella, tell me, you're working in those camps. Is that the reality that we're seeing?
Yes, this is a real big problem, and it is an emerging phenomenon that regards all Europe. In Italy, since the 90s, we have started to see that many Romanians, Roma, are escaping from situation of poverty, of violence, and are coming to Italy looking for a better life. The majority of the people that I've met and that I've been spoken with tells me that they come to Italy hoping that Italy might be their America, but instead they end up one night and they arrive to Italy and they found themselves in a slum, in a camp full of rats, of dirt, and they find out that the only thing they can do is go begging on the streets for earning a living.
So what are you doing to help these people? How can you actually make it a better experience for them?
Well, we have started up an experimental project with some Roma families, starting from them. We actually did not know what to do with them, you know, because we were working in some illegal camps, and these camps were cleared out. So the Roma called us, and we just decided to welcome them in the House of Charity where I work, and start up an experimental project. So we started up from the people, and from trying to empower their abilities in order to promote their social inclusion, their working inclusion, and then also their housing inclusion. And we actually saw that this is a possible thing. Investing in people, in their abilities, actually give them, to the Roma, the chance of getting a better life.
Mm-hmm. So giving them an actual opportunity.
Yes.
Yeah. And Italy apparently is one of the places that's been a hot spot, a black spot for this sort of action. Can you tell me what the problems have been?
The first problem is the huge ignorance that there is on the Roma. So I really agree on what the other guests have said before. The majority of the Italian population think that the Roma are nomads. They don't know that the majority of the Roma are actually sedentary. And for example, in Romania, we're used to work and to have a normal life like anybody else. So also at a political level, this is very much used for gaining votes. So it is very much used to gain votes by saying we are going to send away all the gypsy, all the nomads that are coming here to, for example, steal. Because obviously, if the majority of the population think that you are a nomad and they don't know what you do for a living, the second thing they're going to think is that you are a thief. So that is one big problem. And the second problem is that instead, a lot of Roma people in Italy work, but obviously for the discrimination they are victims of, they do not say, I am a Roma, they just say, I am Romania, I come from Kosovo, and so on. So actually this is a huge problem that we are trying to fight by helping the Roma to find concrete opportunities of inclusion.
So this is a very interesting thing that you've hit on there, this idea of stereotypes. And I want to just come to you, Isabella, and ask about the stereotype of a Roma. There's the good, there's the bad, there's the negative, the stealing, the profiting, the dirtiness. There's the positive one about music and colourful lifestyles. But what really is the true Roma?
Well, I would just want to underline that the music and the good things actually are not really shown always in an objective light, and usually it's just to give a more romantic picture of who Roma really are. And I think Roma are now no different from any other people. But because of this prejudice, it really affected the way Roma people think about themselves, and they internalize a very victim type position. And you can see that in the fact that Roma don't really declare necessarily their ethnic identity, which is very problematic, actually, because they can't really affirm their ethnic minority rights as well. So it's really problematic how perceptions play an important role in laying down certain images about certain groups. And obviously Roma have been a clear victim of negative stereotyping. But if I could go back, if I may, to the Italian case, which I really think it's very important, and I would say that you're pretty right in the fact that a big problem with that has been that Roma have been addressed as a nomadic group, regardless of the fact that in Italy you have Sinti Roma that have been living there for 500 years. You have the Roma from ex-Yugoslavia who went there as asylum seekers, as refugees, and then you have Roma from the EU member states. And regardless, it's not just the problem of the people, but the government itself. If you look at the reports that they send to the Council of Europe, they still refer to them as nomads and not as what they are, citizens of their own country. And I think a lot of the problem is not just with the perception of the people, but with the failure of the government to really address the issues of the Roma people according to their different statuses.
Yes, I'd like to actually just come back on one point, which was, we heard this earlier on, sterilisation. The issue of sterilisation. We've heard that the Roma are very prejudiced, but this is a very egregious example how Roma women have been robbed really of their reproductive rights. Gwen, you've been following this story. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about it?
Yes. In the former Czechoslovakia, there was a government-sponsored program to promote sterilization as a family planning measure to women in general. This was disproportionately applied to the Roma. It involved paying women, and if the offer of money didn't do it, then it involved threatening them with various things like taking their existing children away from them, taking benefits away from them, etc. This was a policy that was criticized by Human Rights Watch at the very start of the 1990s and was stopped in 1991. And in the last 20 years now, we've began to hear stories of Romani women specifically being sterilized without their informed consent in a different setting. Now it wasn't that social workers were coming to them and saying, you know, if you do this, we'll pay you money. Now it was women who were pregnant, were going to the hospital to give birth, were told by the doctor that they had to undergo a cesarean section, and were being sterilized, having their tubes tied, tubal ligation, during the operation to deliver the baby. And consent was either never asked, or the women were informed after the fact and told and asked to sign something after the fact, or they were asked to sign something when they were on the operating table in labor. This is completely in violation of laws that existed even under communist Czechoslovakia. There were fairly good laws about how a sterilization is supposed to be performed, because this is an operation like no other. It is not reversible. It's a final decision about your reproductive capacity. And unfortunately, Romani women have had others decide for them everything that they should be deciding themselves. How many children they will have, how far between, all of these decisions that are fundamental to your rights. Someone else decided, a doctor decided, or long ago, 20 years ago, the state. Now, the Czech state has recently acknowledged that this has been going on. The ombudsman reviewed complaints that were brought to him. He believed that they were, he said to everyone, these are illegal sterilizations that have taken place. These women's rights have been violated. He sent all the complaints to the police. There have been no prosecutions.
Mm-hmm. That's obviously something that needs to be taken up.
Yes.
Can I turn to Michael perhaps and ask, the Court of Human Rights and the structures within the Council of Europe, you're looking at this and you're trying to stop this obviously as a huge human rights abuse. Can you tell me what you are in fact doing?
Well, in terms of decisions by the court, I mean, that's true that recent decisions concern quite many cases of segregation, for example, in schools in the Czech Republic, or there are now cases as well regarding sterilization in Slovakia. So definitely these court cases bring a change in a sense that it puts on the highest agenda this segregation and discriminations of Roma in Europe. It attracts also the media attention and then also the population. So it creates debate and it creates change in terms of policies. But still, the main issue is the reluctance at the local level of really implementing this change of policies. And as long as you don't have population supporting, for example, mayors or local authorities, doing integration projects for Roma, then you will of course have again and again perpetrations of abuses. The Council of Europe is, for instance, now, in the case of this DOSTA campaign, we have mentioned launching the third edition of the Congress Prize, which is a prize given by the Congress for Local and Regional Authorities, which is to give an award for municipalities who are having a long-term integration projects for their Roma population. To give the positive message and not always complaining, I think is quite important as well in terms of changing mentalities.
It's very interesting. Donatella, I see you nodding very much during that little exchange. What would be your prescription for the future?
Well, first of all, to work at the information and educational level for promoting a better knowledge of the Roma and of their problems, and for fighting the prejudices they are victim of, but also for publicizing the good results that are possible if you invest on them and if you build for them real and concrete opportunities of integration.
And Michael, for the Council of Europe?
Well, we are just celebrating the 20th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, and I think my wish for the future would be definitely that we break down the walls, the mental walls we have regarding Roma, but also the physical walls sometimes. And I think one of the main tools for this is to give the voice to the Roma. That's why we also organize Romani Women's Conferences to give the voice to Romani women. Isabella might have a word about that, but also to European Roma Interest Forum, for example, which is an organization to raise the voice of the Roma in Europe in international organizations.
So, Isabella, you have the chance now to give the Roma woman's view. What do you think is the most important thing for the future?
Right. Well, I would say two things. I think one important thing is that next time somebody asks me who I am and where do I come from, I would be able to say I'm from Romania, but I'm also a Roma woman. And then the person would just say, well, how great. That would be something of an achievement. And the second thing I would want to say is that Roma people really wish to have equal human rights protection and human security, because Roma rights are Indian human rights, and Roma rights do matter, and they have to matter for everybody else.
So, still a lot of work to be done, still a lot of work to be done for the future to make sure that Roma do have a life. We hope that you too will begin to change the attitudes towards the Roma. And thank you for joining Viewpoint. Goodbye.